Would you pray with me a moment? Open my lips that my mouth might show forth your praise. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. The normal Thanksgiving sermon points out how blessed we are, how we should count our blessings, how we should be present to our blessings, how we should thank God from whom all blessings flow. But what about all the bad stuff? What about the things in our lives that crush our spirits? The things that redirect our lives into paths we did not want to take. The things that make us not like our life, that feel like pebbles inside our shoes. The things that make us perhaps not just doubt God, but even curse or hate God. Well, if you're a Yankee like me, you're brought up to pretend that they just didn't happen and move on, to reframe things so that they're somehow not categorically bad anymore. Minimize and say, it's not all that bad. And if you're like me, then you've been doing that all your life. And we can pretend all we like. But the pain and the other emotions from the bad stuff linger. And the pieces that are broken off, whether it's the people you love who are gone, or the opportunities we longed for that are no longer possible, or the health that we enjoyed which we don't have anymore, well, those pieces that are broken off stay broken off, and they don't come back like the salamander's tail. So what are we to do theologically and spiritually and emotionally with the bad stuff? Because the answers to those questions are really, really important. Theologically, where could God possibly be in all of this? Spiritually, how do I remain hopeful and peaceful and courageous and confident? And emotionally, how do I keep out of despair and depression? So rather than give you a bunch of theories about bad stuff, I'm going to tell you a story this morning. And it's my story, one of my stories. And I tell it not because I'm the hero, or I'm self-obsessed, or I want you to know everything about me, but because it's the only story I really know from the inside out, as in I know what happened and I know how it feels, and I can tell it more truly than other stories I've heard about. So I grew up in a part of Worcester that's very much like Dover. I had a very happy childhood. I lived in a big, comfortable house with a dog and 3 cats. We had a big yard with trees to climb in and run around. We had a house on the beach on the Cape where I went sailing, as I told the kids. My parents took us to museums and concerts, and the expectation, which I was told regularly by my parents, was that I was going to grow up to go to the Ivy League and rise to the top of whatever I chose to do with my life, just as my father had. Now, that was great until I was 15, when my parents had a very bad divorce. And divorce laws, for those of you who divorced a long time ago, will know that they were different back then. So on top of the emotional catastrophe, which was the bad divorce, as in my parents were very angry about what happened, my mother and us kids went from being like everyone all around us, which is houses full of families of doctors and lawyers and business executives in a big house, to being poor people in a big house in a neighborhood full of very comfortable people. And I left private school to go to public school, and I stopped rowing, which was ultimately going to be my ticket to the Ivy League because I was very good at rowing. And I was no longer going to Harvard or Dartmouth. I was going to the State University if I could afford it. And I went to work. Whenever I had a spare moment, I was working after school in summers. I started delivering newspapers and scooping ice cream. I worked in a hardware store and lumber yard. I cut anyone's lawn who needed it. I bought a snowblower with my newspaper money and went into the snow shoveling business. I drove a forklift in a factory. I baked potato chips in a factory. I was a salad chef in a restaurant. And I was a mason's assistant, all before I graduated from high school. You name it, I did it to make a buck. But I want to tell you, making a buck, while essential because you need a buck, is frankly a total waste of time if you want to do something special with your life. Because minimum wage only gets you minimum wages. And my friends, who were all boys that I grew up in the neighborhood, they used to make jokes about all of my jobs. They thought it was sort of funny how Max had all these crazy jobs. They thought I was money crazy. And I was envious of them because they were playing golf or doing internships, which were going to get them to something special. So this one event in my life, in 1978, my parents splitting up, and all the wreckage it caused was, in retrospect, the determining factor for the first half of my life. Determining, I say, because everything I did or tried to do bounced off of that event. It took me 10 years longer than it might have to get where I wanted to be in life because I had to get there on my own. And what I didn't know at the time was that the energy I brought to everything in my life was fueled by that divorce. I was filled with a craving to get over the hump where I wouldn't have to scrape by anymore. I was filled with resentment about how hard it had made things for me. I was angry, and I was afraid. I was afraid, man, if I don't make it, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. In short, I spent the next 20 years rejecting this bad thing that happened. You can't reject something that's happened. It just is. But I was trying to overcome it. And in trying to overcome it and rejecting it, I was allowing it to call the shots in my life. But then something happened. And it's a long story, and it's another sermon. But I was taught to embrace my feelings about that event and the 20 ensuing years. And I finally embraced Jesus' teachings on forgiveness. And just like that, it all fell away. And I'm not kidding you. It just fell away. And it was only once I offloaded it all, I realized what a heavy burden I had been carrying around for so long. I realized what gargling vinegar tastes like for 20 years. What living resentful and angry and fearful lived like. It was dark and gloomy, not a lot of hope. And I realized that I had something to say to everyone, maybe some of you here today, about what a waste of life it is to live angry and fearful and resentful and unforgiving and unforgiven. And ever since that big forgiveness and the bad thing that it forced on me, I get up every day and I forgive freely and quickly and lightly. And I live, hopefully. And I know you will too, if you just give it a try. And that's made a lot of difference for me. The second good that came out of the bad was when I finally embraced it and forgave and could breathe again, I realized that I had been lucky to learn a lot about life that I would not have learned had this never happened. If I had just grown up in my neighborhood, in my prep school, and off to the Ivy League, and then straight downtown to State Street and on with my life. I know what scraping by feels like. I know what struggling to make ends meet feels like. I know what being underemployed and unemployed means, and what having no opportunity does to your soul. And my friends, because I still lived in the same neighborhood, would lecture me about the wonders of Reaganomics. and about the poor pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. But I knew if you don't have any boots to put the straps on, you can pull all you like, but they're not coming on. Or if you did have a pair of boots to pull on, you wouldn't know what to do next. Or you'd walk right into a closed door because someone was already on the inside who got there first. You see, I knew what I wouldn't have known if this hadn't happened. I knew that it's hard and that I had learned compassion and mercy. And I thank God for that. I learned it the hard way, and I probably would have preferred to learn it another way. But those of you who know me know I'm a stubborn mule. And it takes a hell of a beating to get something inside my head. But it did. And if you think that's enough to be thankful for all the bad stuff, there's even more. Once I realized all of this, and I processed my feelings, and I saw everything in retrospect, I realized I'm no longer afraid of the bad stuff. Now I know that with faith and hope and love, there's always something to learn from whatever happens in your life. Some hopeful next. And what I also learned is that some of what looks bad isn't actually bad if you just take your eyes out of the bad glasses that you're wearing and see it for what it is. Until I embraced it and allowed it to transform me, that stuff ruled me. And what it did to me was it made me make further bad decisions in my life. And it made me unable to see things as they were because I was looking through the lens of those glasses. I was misperceiving so much in my life. So, 35 years on, I can't say I'm with the Apostle Paul where I rejoice in my sufferings. I can't say that. But what I can say is I'm hopeful. And I trust that God is making all things move forward for the good for those who loves God. And I invite you to think about that in this Thanksgiving season, particularly if there are some hard things going on in your life. Amen.